All right, everyone, ready to dive in. Today we're tackling a big one, relationships. We're doing a deep dive into John Gray's Men are from Mars, Women are from Venus.
A classic for sure. And it seems like everyone's at least heard of it, right?
Totally. It's been around forever, and people are still turning to it for answers. So whether you're hitting a rough patch or just curious about all the Mars-Venus talk, we're going to break it all down. We're talking key ideas, those juicy examples, and hopefully giving you some real strategies to navigate your own relationships.
Sounds like a plan.
So first things first, Mars-Venus, obviously a metaphor.
Right. Not literally from different planets, but sometimes.
Yeah.
Anyway, Gray's main point is that men and women deal with stress and communicate in totally different ways. And those differences, that's where a lot of the conflict comes from. Misunderstandings, arguments, you name it.
Okay, so let's get specific. Gray says when stress hits men, they head for their caves. They go all internal. Right?
Exactly. It's that classic Mars-Venus clash. It's not that men don't care. It's more like they need that space to process, figure things out in their own heads.
Meanwhile, us women, we want to talk it out.
Right. And that's where things can go south fast. He's off in his cave. She's thinking he doesn't care. He even gives this example in the book. Woman comes home, had a tough day, wants to vent. Her partner, meaning well, jumps in with solutions.
Oh, I've been there. And spoiler alert, it never goes well.
Because what she needs in that moment isn't to be fixed, it's to be heard, to feel understood, validated, like someone gets it.
Like they're speaking the same language.
Yeah,
Okay, takeaway number one. Men need space. Women need to be heard. Seems simple enough, but it's huge. Now, get ready for this next concept, so things get really interesting. The well and the wave. It's about how women's emotions are like, well, a wave. They rise, they crest, they fall back down.
And that cycle, that's key to understanding a lot of what Gree's talking about. The well is that natural dip in mood and energy. And here's the thing. It's not a man's job to fix it.
No need to whip out the toolbox when your partner's feeling down.
Not quite. Gray says during this well phase, it's not just about present-day stress. Women are often dealing with unresolved stuff from the past bubbling up.
So those little frustrations. Maybe not so little after all.
Exactly. He says only about 10% of a woman's upset during the well is actually about what's happening right then. The other 90%. Leftover baggage.
Okay, wow. That's like a whole lot of baggage. Therapy, anyone. But seriously, that changes things, doesn't it? It's not about blaming women for being emotional or telling men to just suck it up. It's about understanding there's a deeper dynamic at play.
Exactly. And once you get that, it changes everything. Men can offer support without taking things personally, and women, they can start to understand their own emotional patterns a little better.
So much to unpack there. But before we get ahead of ourselves, we've got to address the big question. How do we actually use this knowledge to, make our relationships better? I mean, that's what we're all here for.
You're telling me understanding is great, but then comes the tricky part. How do we actually use this stuff? And Gray's got some surprisingly good advice, especially when it comes to communication.
Because who doesn't love a good tip?
Yeah.
So spill it. What really stood out to you?
Well, one thing, especially with this whole 90-10 baggage thing, is taking timeouts.
Timeouts, like mid-argument timeouts.
Yep. When things get heated, sometimes the best thing is to just step away, let everyone cool off, process on their own for a bit.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense. Trying to hash it out when you're both fired up is, well, good luck with that.
Right. And the thing is, timeout looks different for everyone. Men, they might need that literal cave time, to go be alone with their thoughts.
And women. Doubt it's sitting in silence.
Probably not. Calling a friend, journaling, maybe going for a run. It's about processing those emotions, but not needing to solve everything right that second.
So figuring out what works for you. Now, I know a lot of us, especially women, struggle with expressing our feelings without, accidentally blowing up at our partner.
Yeah.
Any tips for that whole minefield?
I statements. It's a classic therapy thing, but it works. Focus on what you're feeling, not blaming them for it.
Okay, example time. How's that work in, like, a real fight?
So say your partner's glued to their phone, you're feeling ignored, instead of, you never listen, which just makes them defensive. Try, I feel unheard when you're on your phone during our conversations.
Subtle, but yeah, totally different vibe. One's attacking, the other's just stating how you feel. Okay, that's helpful. What about the guys, though? Where do they fit into this?
Gray talks about men learning to just validate their partner's feelings without jumping in to fix it.
Ah, the Mr. Fix-It thing. My dad's the king of that. But seriously, I know so many guys who do that, even when we just want to vent.
It comes from a good place, but it can backfire big time. Makes the woman feel like her feelings are wrong somehow, like she needs to be fixed.
So what's the alternative? What's a better way to respond in those moments?
Keeping it simple works wonders. I understand you're feeling frustrated, or even just, that sounds really tough. Acknowledging, empathizing, that goes a long way.
Less fixing, more feeling. Got it.
Yeah.
Now, another area where those Mars-Venus differences really show up is in asking for support. Gray's got a whole thing about this, and it's pretty eye-opening, especially for us women. The whole would you, will you versus could you, can you thing, remember that?
Oh, yeah. It's about wording things in a way that makes men want to step up, an invitation, not a demand.
Exactly. And then he goes on about programming a man to say yes. Sounds kind of manipulative, but
It's more like by asking the right way consistently and then really showing appreciation when he does it, you create this positive feedback loop.
so not manipulating, but creating an environment where they feel good about helping out, which makes them want to do it more.
Exactly. It's not about instant results, Gray says. It takes time, effort from both sides to build that kind of dynamic.
Like building trust, intimacy. That takes time.
Exactly. And speaking of building something positive, here's another thing Gray talks about. Focusing on the positive.
Because it's easy to get stuck in negativity, especially when those Mars-Venus arguments keep happening, right?
Right. And his suggestion is simple, but powerful. Write down 101 things you appreciate about your partner.
Whoa, 101. That's oddly specific.
It is, but I think that's the point. Makes you really think about it. Shift your focus to the good stuff, the stuff we take for granted.
And not just think it, right? He's talking about actually writing it all down.
Yeah. He is. There's something about that, putting it on paper, creating that tangible reminder of why you love them, especially when you're feeling disconnected or whatever.
Okay, I'm sold. 101 things on it. But in the meantime, any other tips for like bringing that positivity into our relationships?
He talks a lot about just saying it out loud. The appreciation, I mean. Doesn't have to be complicated. A genuine thank you goes a long way.
Love that. It's such a little thing, but it means so much, doesn't it? Like, I see you, I appreciate you. Who doesn't want to hear that?
Exactly. Little deposits into that emotional bank account, right? And, as much as we've been talking communication and feelings, we got to talk about the elephant in the room, intimacy.
Ah, yes. The big I word. And Gray dives right into it, doesn't he? Even using that whole rubber band metaphor.
He does. One of the more memorable parts, that's for sure. He says men are like rubber bands, in a way.
Okay, I'm listening. How so?
Well, think about it. Rubber band, you got to pull it back to get that tension, that potential energy, before it can spring forward, right? And Gray says a lot of men, they need that same distance, that space, to then be able to connect intimately.
So the whole absence makes the heart grow fonder thing.
That's the idea. But for a lot of women, wanting that closeness, it's not really about physical distance. It's more about emotional presence, feeling seen, heard, that kind of thing.
Which, let's be real, is usually where the problems start, right?
Yeah.
One person's pulling away, the other wants to be closer. Recipe for disaster.
Exactly. And this is where understanding that rubber band thing helps. It's not that one way of experiencing intimacy is right or wrong. It's just different. And figuring out how to navigate that difference is key.
So for the women out there nodding along, thinking, yep, my guy's a total rubber band man, what's Gray's advice? How do we deal with that need for space without taking it personally?
Recognizing that when he's in his cave, it's not the time for deep talks or trying to fix things. Resist the urge to chase him down.
Just trust that he'll come back.
Exactly. Trust is huge. And when he does come back, greet him with warmth, not resentment about the time apart.
Makes sense. Who wants to come out of their man cave to a grumpy partner?
Yeah.
So what about the guys? What do they need to get about women and intimacy?
Gray's big thing is that women often just need that reassurance. Love, affection, compliments, hugs, really listening. Those little things go a long way.
It's the little things, right? Not always about grand gestures, but those everyday moments and say, I love you.
Absolutely. And men being proactive about creating those moments is huge. Date nights, starting those conversations, showing they care about what she's into. It's about putting in the effort, not just coasting along. Now, before we get to our final takeaways, one more important thing Gray talks about, the difference between love and approval.
Okay, interesting. How are those different? And why does it matter so much in relationships? Love and approval. Yeah, I can see how that gets messy. What's the difference? And why is it such a big deal in relationships?
Gray says a lot of us, without even realizing it, hold back love because we're waiting for our partner to earn it, to meet our expectations.
So it's like, I'll really love you once you fix that thing on the to-do list.
Exactly. Or if you really love me, you do this thing I want, conditional love.
Mm-hmm.
And it's toxic, you know? The guy feels like he's always failing. The woman feels resentful. Nobody wins.
Total recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we get out of that trap? What's the opposite of conditional love?
For women, Gray talks about learning to love unconditionally, accepting their partner for who they are, flaws and all.
Easier said than done, right? Especially when you're annoyed about something.
Oh, for sure. It takes practice. And look, it doesn't mean you have to love everything they do or that you can't have boundaries. It's more about that shift in perspective, seeing those flaws as part of what makes them, well, them.
Embracing the whole package.
Yep.
Rubber bands and all.
Exactly. And guys, important to remember, when your partner's looking for approval, it's not always about you. Often, it's her own insecurities, past experiences bubbling up.
So instead of getting defensive, try to be understanding.
Exactly. It's not a personal attack. It's a chance to connect on a deeper level. Maybe even talk about those underlying issues that are causing the friction.
So communication is key. Remembering those Mars-Venus differences and having empathy for each other and ourselves, really.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And Gray really does a good job of giving you the tools to actually do those things, you know, to build stronger, more loving relationships.
It's been quite the deep dive. We've gone through the big ideas from men are from Mars, women are from Venus, the caves, the well and the wave, all that good stuff. More importantly, we've talked about how to actually use those ideas in your own life.
Absolutely.
And you know, what really strikes me is how much of Gray's advice is about knowing yourself, understanding your own needs, your triggers, the baggage you might be bringing to the table.
So true. He talks a lot about healing those old wounds and how that's not selfish. It's actually crucial for a healthy relationship.
Right. You can't pour from an empty cup and all that. The more you work on yourself, the more you have to give to someone else.
Yeah.
So to everyone listening, here's something to think about. Gray says even small changes can make a big difference. What's one thing you can do this week, even a tiny thing, to put all this into practice? Maybe it's taking a time out when things get heated, trying that would you thing when you need something, or even just telling your partner how much you appreciate them. Whatever it is, make it a conscious choice. See what happens.
Love that. It's those little consistent efforts that really add up in the long run.
And on that note, we're officially calling it a wrap on this deep dive. Until next time, happy exploring, everyone.
Love what you're hearing? Hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share it with others. Your support fuels the journey for more awesome content.